Paint Care is all about keeping it simple for district residents. They make recycling leftover paint easy with convenient locations like your local paint store. Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter and reducing waste. 1, buy the right amount of paint for the job. 2, use up what's left. And 3, recycle the rest. Visit paintcare.org/3simplerules to learn more, or find a paint drop-off site near you.
Today on CityCast DC, DC police are getting drones, DC bicyclists are getting a new trail, and Abraham Lincoln, he's melting. I'm here with City Paper's Alex Koma and my CityCast comrade Julia Karron. And listener, you have got to join us for our next live taping. It's at Metro Bar DC. My friend and co-host Bridget Todd will be joined by the city government's planning honchos to talk about their new podcast, District Crossroads. We will dive into a project focused on the North Capitol Corridor to explore how they are going to plan its future. The taping starts at 2 p.m. on July 13th. You can RSVP on our website. Come have a drink and say hi. Today is Friday, June 28th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Alex.
Hello.
Julia, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm all right. Back from vacation, ready to rock. And I'm back to a city where the police are rolling out 5 drones. Alex, what's the story?
Yeah, this is sort of an experimental program on DC's part. They say that these drones are not going to be coming out to 911 calls or anything like that, but that they envision getting a chance to start using these a little bit more with things like reconstructing a major crash after the fact, getting another angle in a dangerous barricade situation, something like that. Maybe even monitoring protests, which DC certainly has its fair share of. So it's something that we've seen a little bit around the country, but not a ton in DC because of the very obvious airspace concerns about where you are and are not allowed to fly a drone around here. Anybody will tell you there's big problems with that. And so it seems like this is the preview of something more to come. Obviously, the big bit at that event was showing off their shiny new, I think, $6 million police helicopter as well. But don't be surprised if you see the smaller version of drones and all that, too.
And they cost $15,000 a pop.
They sure did.
That's less than a Prius.
Well, there's always money in the MPD budget for new toys. You got to keep them well stocked.
But look at, my first reaction as a good American citizen is to be anxious and skeptical of robotic police tech. On the other hand, so much of the discourse in the last few years, during 2020 particularly, was about police making calls for informational things where the presence of an officer with a gun does not necessarily calm the situation down. Maybe this reduces some of that necessity. What's your takeaway? Obviously, we haven't seen it in action, but based on what they've said, what do you think?
Yeah, you can squint and see the utility, as you say, but the key, of course, with any of this stuff, right, is are we going to have a robust conversation as a community about how we're using these? And thus far, the answer is no, because the way that the mayor chose to approach this was just sort of showing them off. Everyone saying, okay, here they are. The Chief Pam Smith at MPD assures us that they're not going to be used with facial recognition technology. They're not going to be used for surveillance. And we just take their word for it, I guess.
Well, wait, do we just take their word for it? The council, elected by the voters, is able to conduct oversight. And it seems to me of course they're going to roll it out like this, but there are other players both in government and in the sort of civil society space who are now in a position to ask questions and conduct oversight. Are they empowered to do that?
I think they are, and I think they should. There have been some efforts to make, there's not zero laws on the books around this stuff, but certainly if we're in a world where this is no longer a hypothetical or theoretical, police are actually going to be using these drones in the field, there needs to be more of a conversation about setting out guardrails for this. Because as the Washington Informer did a good job of reporting, the MPD community engagement around this stuff consisted of them going to a few meetings of community leaders in places like Ward 7 and 8 and just mentioning, oh yeah, we're doing this. Not, what do you think? How should they be used? What are the problems you see? It was just sort of, we're doing this, get on board. And that with a technology that, even if it, may, as you say, have some benefits, certainly feels dystopian, certainly creates the perception of increased government surveillance. I mean, they're assuring people that, they'll only be used at protests, but there are huge surveillance concerns.
Yeah, wait, they've said that they won't use facial recognition, but obviously protesters are worried that they will use that exact facial recognition to find them and then put them in jail. I mean, with these things flying around, is it going to be 1984-esque if you're out and about and you're happen to be near a crime scene? Is it just boom, there's a drone? I'm so confused.
Well, that's the thing, is they say it's not. So let's hope. But MPD has faced hard questions before about the amount it surveils groups that are involved in various protests, normally via things like social media. But it's certainly worth asking the question, I think, even if I am sympathetic to the fact that they have to police more large demonstrations than just about anybody in the country, and that's expensive and difficult. But come on, you can't just drop that on people with the history that police all over the country have with this stuff and not expect some questions.
Wait a minute. Can I ask just a question about the state of the law in D.C.? If the Metropolitan Police Department wanted to use facial recognition technology, would they be allowed to right now? Is that, leaving aside whether someone would give them the budget for it and stuff, but is that legal under D.C. law?
It may be one of those areas that it is ill-defined. There may be questions about, for instance, how admissible something like that would be in court. And that would sort of have to be for the judges to decide. But it's my understanding that there aren't a ton of guardrails about this stuff. In fact, it's interesting that they've suggested that AI could as part of this facial recognition, could be part of any solution with these drones someday. And of course, the Bowser administration has rolled out an AI task force that is supposed to be helping them think through all of these questions. I would be a little surprised to see them take on something as thorny as this. But I say that to say this is an area where there still is not a lot of set policy and people are doing this on the fly. Charles Allen, the Ward 6 council member, recently introduced a bill that would aim to tackle political deepfakes using AI in advertising. That is some of the first AI legislating or facial recognition technology legislating that we've seen in DC by and large. It strikes me that there should probably be a lot more, but it's a hard issue for folks to tackle when they have, pressing, less sci-fi, pie in the sky concerns than this.
We're acting like this is all new because these drones can move. But look, DC is an incredibly well photographed city. There are a lot of cameras. So in effect, we've been having this conversation. And I think protests are a particularly special case because, as you may have noticed, our protests in the city are exhaustively photographed by the participants. Look at January 6th. Look at 900 or whatever the number of people is have been arrested and in many cases convicted based on available video and photography. So this has been going on. Now we have a little thing that kind of flies and can be steered by somebody. So that increases that, but the amount of surveillance it's not like we're going from nothing. Can I ask you, you cover this and you're going to be covering this, who are the point people that we ought to be looking at? We obviously know that the mayor and the police chief are in charge of the police department, and so they're going to be rolling it out. But in terms of people who will either, by virtue of their other elected office, be in a position to ask questions and conduct oversight, or people who are just in the community as experts and activists whose role in this conversation is going to be important, who should we be watching?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the council, Ward 2 Councilmember Brooke Pinto, she chairs the Judiciary Committee. That is the committee where you would expect to see somebody asking tough questions, passing legislation. As we've discussed, I think ad nauseum, in my opinion, Brooke Pinto has generally been a little too deferential to what the police have been asking for and not really pressing for a lot of tough oversight. But hey, maybe that'll change. Council Chair Fennel Mendelsohn, he has been much more critical of police in recent years and been willing to push forward some of the George Floyd era reforms in a way others, haven't. He is not exactly the most responsive to the sort of organizations that would be watching this sort of stuff. First and foremost, the ACLU, which has already raised concerns about this. But it's not impossible. There are some council members like Phil Mendelsohn, like Charles Allen, who I mentioned before, who used to chair the Judiciary Committee. You could imagine them taking a harder glance at this stuff. But because it is all still so new, we sort of haven't even had, as you were alluding to, Mike, a conversation about the existing surveillance that we have. It's hard to imagine a ton happening. I mean, it's worth mentioning the Bowser administration has said that this information would feed into their real-time crime center, which they touted starting up pretty recently. That's pulling in surveillance footage from all over the city, not just from official sources, but also from private businesses that have agreed to participate. We haven't even really had a robust conversation about, is that a good idea? And now we're adding even more. So I think it's early to say where that debate will go, if it goes anywhere. People might just say, this is too arbitrary and esoteric for us to get down in the weeds on.
Hey DC, let's talk trees. We all know planting trees is one of the best ways to take care of our environment, our community, and our health. They combat climate change, cool our city, clean our air and water, improve our physical and mental health, bring our communities together. I mean, the list goes on and on. But what if we don't have any inhabitable space for trees? What if, in order to save our trees, we first need to save the soil in which those trees are planted? KC Trees is a local nonprofit working to conserve DC's green spaces and nearby nature that makes our city so great to live in. Visit kctrees.org to learn more about how to protect our green spaces and natural areas.
Let's be real, lawsuits are not fun, but with Paulson and Nace, at least they're a little easier. Paulson and Nace is a DC law firm in every sense of the word. It was founded here in 1979. Partner Chris Nace is a local who cares deeply about the DC community, even serving on the board of the local branch of the Living Classrooms Foundation in his free time. Nace and his associates Samantha Peters and Maya Perry handle medical malpractice, wrongful death, and other complex injury cases. And they don't just settle every case. They'll go to court. They'll fight for you. Paulson and Nace has even been recognized as one of U.S. News' best law firms. So if you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Paulson and Nace for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.paulsonandnace.com. That's PAULSONANDNACE.com. Or call 202-463-1999. All right, so listen, in a much less controversial piece of news, this is in the subcategory bike lanes, non-controversial. DC has gotten a $25 million grant from the feds, which they're going to use to create a new 1.8-mile trail connecting Fort Lincoln in southeast DC to the Anacostia Riverwalk. And I think of bike infrastructure in kind of two ways. One is like the stuff designed to help you, the commuter, ride a bike instead of taking a car. And the other is infrastructure like trails and stuff that is designed to help you, the recreational person, have a bit of recreation that you might otherwise do hiking or playing basketball or something else. And I think of them as separate moral categories too, because the bike infrastructure on streets, insofar as that reduces pollution, gets cars off the road, et cetera, it creates a social good. Bike infrastructure for recreation, I don't think is any more or less noble than any other form of recreation that you as a citizen might choose to engage in. But what do you guys make of this trail, its location, and its potential to be excellent?
I mean, my view is the more the merrier. I grew up near the Capitol Crescent Trail, And I would bike on that all the time to like get into Bethesda or take it all the way down to Georgetown. And my view is like, okay, like if that's a way that people want to commute and have access to Fort Lincoln and the Riverwalk, I still need to go to the Riverwalk. I haven't been in a long time. Like, to me, it is generally a good thing. Obviously, the detail is going to be in the execution. $25 million does seem like a lot. And hopefully, like my hope is they get it right, generally.
You say, oh, like, well, this isn't a commuting trail. And that's true, but it could replace the car trips that I'm often taking to the Costco up there, depending on my final destination. So don't sleep on it just yet. But what I will say is that exactly as you were alluding to, Mike, like, this is a sign of how long these projects take, even if they aren't as controversial as, say, the Connecticut Avenue bike lanes that I know you've discussed before. I was looking at project documents for this earlier, and there have been ANCs talking about this since 2015 at least. Probably even a little bit earlier, and it's going to be years yet before it's built, largely only possible due to this federal money.
Wait, why does it cost $25 million to build 1.8 miles of bike trail?
I mean, that's the thing. It's every transportation project in the city and largely this country, because you've got to do an environmental impact study and that costs money. Then you've got to have endless meetings with the community. You're showing them the designs. They don't like this one. Well, put in a new one. They don't like this one. And so $25 million easily may not be enough. Like that is just how it doesn't need to be how things work in this city, but it certainly by and large is.
Every time you get into bikes, and this is like terribly unfair, but like the kind of semiotics of bike comes up, and it often is perceived as something that is coded towards young, better educated people, etc. One of my old colleagues used to describe a difference between like spandex bikers and sock tuck bikers. Like
yes.
The spandex bikers, they're the ones on the weekend who like, this is the thing you do for sports. And the sock tuckers are like the ones who like, they'll tuck their pants into their socks and bike to work. And this grant is part of a transportation program. So it's not like they could have used it for an amphitheater or a basketball court or a pickleball or whatever else people might want to do for fitness and recreation. Alex, you cover city politics. What's the state of play in terms of the politics of bikes? Like that, is there a sense that like people with other interests are shortchanged or bikers always get to the front of the line? That's often the refrain. I don't know if it's accurate though.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the state broadly, I would say quite bad and getting worse. We're already seeing, in addition to the fight on Connecticut Avenue, an emerging fight on South Dakota Avenue up in Ward 5 where this trail would end on one side. And part of it is exactly because of some of the ways in which city leaders frame this issue, rather than being like, just because we're building a bike lane doesn't mean that you personally have to use it. It doesn't mean that it is going to ruin your commute. In fact, it may well improve it if it means that it's safer. A lot of the places where these bike lanes are built are some of the most, it's part of a strategy to narrow the roadway, get people to drive slower. I mean, you've been on DC roads, people drive crazy. The narrower roads are, the more they're forced to slow down.
Right, but I think I'm pretty typical in that like, I hate crazy drivers unless I'm one of them, in which case, like, because when I'm one of them, it's like because I'm in a hurry and it's very important right now.
To be fair, I'm a Maryland driver, so I feel like the argument over who has the worst drivers is like, at this point, beaten to death. But at the same time, like, yes, my view, like I'm looking at the map right now of where the trail would go and how it would work. And this is from the Department of Transportation. And it's all like, looks like it's along the river, and it would take people, one, from this Costco. Could you imagine trying to huck Costco stuff onto your bike and going all the way down to potentially Navy Yard? Wild times. But my view of that is like, if it gets people from that area down to Navy Yard in a way, say you have to work in Navy Yard, it's one of the more popular places now, like, is that not necessarily a good thing, as opposed to having to take 395 or 295 or like try and drive through the city and down South Dakota and then whip around? Like, is that a good thing, a bad thing?
Yeah, and that's why this is, like we said, this is an easier sell, right? This isn't necessarily going to be on a road that people are using all the time. So this is generally the sort of stuff that the Bowser administration has still been willing to pursue. This is easier for them than taking on the hard fights like Connecticut Avenue, where they have largely retreated. They used to be very out in front on this stuff and saying, we want to provide options for people. If you build it, they will come, whether they are a weekend warrior, as you describe, or someone who could be persuaded to use another mode of transportation if the option was available to them. But by and large, this isn't happening. This federal grant with a project that has been plotted out that does not involve, it's still going to involve some street construction, but certainly not as much as others. This is freebie. It's much more toxic the more congested an artery gets that you start talking about.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, CEO of CityCast. Or, as I can say now, thanks to a few weeks with Babbel, hola, soy David Plotz, el jefe de CityCast. What if in 2024 you got a little bit better every day? When you're learning a new language with Babbel, that's exactly what you're doing. And if Babbel can help me start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, imagine what you could do in a full year. I got started with Babbel because I realized that my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, and my son, who's in AP Spanish, were conspiring against me, or I thought they were conspiring against me in Spanish. I wanted to know what they were talking about. And now, thanks to literally just a few weeks of Babbel, I'm starting to be able to eavesdrop. It is rare that something so fun and simple, and Babbel is super fun and very simple, is also so useful. So here's a special limited time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
All right, so you guys, I spent last week next to a very cold lake in Canada.
I'm jealous.
Which is where my wife comes from. But I understand it was hot here. And one of the reasons I understand that is because this picture of this melting statue became like a viral thing, a symbol of DC's summer. What's the story with that?
All right. So over the weekend, there's a 6-foot-tall statue of Abraham Lincoln. It's by this Richmond artist. Name is Sandy Williams IV. It was installed back in February on the campus of Garrison Elementary School in Northwest. It's near that 14th Street corridor. It's actually near one of my favorite coffee places called the Coffee Bar. Huge fan. Basically, it was trying to draw attention to the Civil War era and the aftermath. And it basically got placed under these trees to make sure that there was shade, protected a little bit from the heat. And apparently it was placed on Garrison's grounds because during the Civil War, that was the location of Camp Barker, which was a refuge for people escaping enslavement in the South and trying to seek freedom. And basically, Lincoln is said to have visited that camp on several occasions. So all well and good, the thought behind it, into it. Needless to say, on Saturday, it hit 100 degrees. And so this poor Abe Lincoln statue starts melting, and boy, did the memes abound, because your boy Abe Lincoln has his head lulled back. And this is not CityCast After Dark. If you wanted it to be CityCast After Dark, I highly recommend going to Reddit and reading what people have to say about the compromising position that Abe Lincoln was in. But that is how hot it was.
This statue is made of wax.
Yes.
And Washington, as people may know, is a place that gets hot in the summer. Not always in June, but sometime in the summer, it usually hits pretty high temperatures. Was the expectation that this would eventually melt, or was this meant to last the test of time?
I mean, it got installed in February, which is obviously it's a lot easier to not have a thing melt in February when temperatures are in the 30s and the 40s. Is the expectation that it would melt? No, right? Yes?
I read the artist being interviewed in a very fun Washington Post article that I would recommend, where he was saying the company that he bought this material from assured him, unless it got to 140 or something, that it would be fine. And he said, candidly, he was I just don't think that they ever actually tested it in conditions like a Washington summer, which Fair enough. I will say this statue is in my neighborhood and I've walked by it many times. And until all this happened, I can't say that I even realized it was made of something that could melt. We frankly assumed it was a school project until it was all this because it's at the Garrison Elementary School. So I am glad that melting Abraham Lincoln has taught me about the Civil War history in my backyard.
What are they going to do with it, though? I mean, I imagine it's traumatic to kids. You show up at school and your 16th president, national hero, is either looking like he's doing something inappropriate on school grounds or is looking like he has melted to death. Is it going to be taken away?
Yeah, I think the artist said he wants to bring it back and keep it going.
Like, keep it going, meaning re-sculpt it?
With what wax that doesn't melt in the DC 100-degree plus humidity weather?
Well, that's what I was going to say is we're not even in August yet, man. So I wish him the best of luck.
I think it might be time for a Lincoln statue to be donated to Helsinki Elementary School.
Exactly. I will say, fun fact, this is not the first time that a Lincoln statue has melted in the DC heat. There was a 3,000-pound Lincoln candle. It had 100 wicks that were supposed to be lighted. It was installed at the same location back in September, and before it was officially unveiled, someone lighted more than half the wicks and then left the piece unattended, which if you have ever watched a Smokey the Bear advertisement in your life, only you can prevent forest fires. Apparently, only you can prevent Abe Lincoln from melting, too.
Hey, guys, before we go, I want to just remind everyone that it's really cool to sign up to be a member of CityCast. It costs as little as $8 a month. You just go to membership.citycast.fm to sign up. You will get ad-free listening, first access to events, and super secret extras on occasion. Plus, you're supporting local news. You will help us not melt, people.
Yeah, seriously. Don't be like the Abe Lincoln statue. Be cool. Donate.
Julia, awesome to see you.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
Alex, thanks for being here.
Oh, it was such a fun time, as always.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our interim executive producers are Julia Karron and Kayla Cote-Stemmerman. Kayla also writes our super informative and fun newsletter, Hey DC. Our interim producers are Ash Durbin and Noah Snyderman. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to that morning newsletter. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.